I just wanted to welcome everybody to our addiction and family law webinar. You're joining us for 1 hour, so thank you for taking time out of your lunch break. My name is Letitia Gibson. I'll be the facilitator and moderator for today's session. I just want to thank you all for taking time out in your lunch break to join us on this important issue, because really what we're talking about today is how we as a community of professionals, how we can change the way matters of addiction are handled, and whether that be in the family law system as a lawyer, or with how we deal with clients, or even how we relate to loved ones. I think we all want to lift the curtain on some of the key issues of how these matters are dealt with in the family courts, as well as filling some of those knowledge gaps and empowering you all to help make a difference. After all, we are in all of this together, and the fact that you've shown up today means that you care, which is awesome. For that reason, we do invite you to type in any questions you may have along the way into that chat box, which is down the bottom of your Zoom. I will try my best to address as many of those questions as we can. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out with the follow-up emails after this webinar. So to dive in, I would like to introduce our panelists. We've got Leisa Toomey from Toomey Family Law. Many of you know Leisa. She's an accredited family law specialist with over 30 years experience, and that includes as a children's lawyer. She is highly committed to taking the fight out of family law matters and takes a whole person empathetic approach to all of her cases. And I can attest to that. And I hold her in high esteem for the way she handles matters, because she does care deeply, as I'm sure many of you do as well. About Amelia and Ingrid, these ladies are from D&M Consultants based in Brisbane. Amelia DeCampo is a social worker, and she's well known for the work she's done in private children's supervised contact services. And Dr. Ingrid
McGuffog. Yeah.
I should have practiced that more.
It's a hard one, I know.
She's a criminologist with a background in drug and alcohol research. So today we'll be sharing some of their stories, but also highlighting some of the areas that are of concern for them and solutions that they see as a way forward to address. So thank you again for joining us, ladies, and being part of this.
Thanks, Letitia.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I guess to launch in, why, Leisa, are you passionate about this particular subject?
Thanks, Letitia. I think in my experience over the years, it's become much more obvious that there is so much more, so many more issues out there at the moment that people are dealing with, particularly in relation to addiction issues like alcohol, illegal substances, sex addiction, pornography, all those sorts of things, which are really impacting on the way in which we as lawyers can relate to our clients. Years ago, as a young lawyer, I would certainly be more than happy to divest the responsibility of treating someone or just referring someone off to a specialist and hoping that they could fix them so that they come back to me and I'll be able to deal with my client. I've noticed over the years it doesn't work like that. Issues are becoming way more complex, families are becoming way more complex, and we as family lawyers have to take a more integral role in understanding how to assist our clients through that process. And I think there's a lot of synergy with what D&M consultants are putting forward, because they can offer a service that I think would certainly assist professionals like me in being able to assist our clients who have those types of issues. And of course it leads on to other issues like domestic violence, etc. But that's why I'm passionate about it.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely dive into some of those points that you made a little bit later on. But Amelia, can you share briefly why it is that you wanted to jump on this webinar and I guess help educate people and work with professionals around this subject?
Yeah, so I think that really all of this work with family lawyers over the years to me has highlighted that there is a real lack of understanding when it comes to addiction. And, and I don't blame professionals for that. That's not their area of expertise. But having worked in the field myself for so many years and not being able to do anything about the matters that I see time and time again, it's really led me to feel quite frustrated, because I see the negative impact that it has on families and of course on the children. And you know, we have repeat offenders coming in, as I say, you know, in the contact centre, and their addiction issues are not addressed. And it's like a revolving door, contact centre worlds. And I'm sure everyone can relate, or at least understand that, that's joined on here today. There's a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, it's a bit of a merry-go-round, and taking a whole person approach, I believe, is the only way we can really address this, and working together. So Ingrid, how about you from a professional standpoint, you know, in this area of field and study, what are you seeing needs to be changed, and why are you so passionate about helping professionals also?
I think so. I wear two hats. I have an academic background in drug and alcohol, and I'm also a therapist. So I specialise in drug and alcohol therapy. And what we see is, I mean, I can talk about, you know, the epidemiological data, but we are seeing in Australia at least an increase in people drinking, and an increase in, especially in methamphetamine. So the issue, and that's just substances, gambling is a whole other untapped issue. I think underlying that socially, we've got a great deal of disconnect, and you see that very much in the family law context. I'm really passionate about it because one of the things that I see is a real siloing of issues from, so we have a family law matter, and you see orders come through saying, well, you need this treatment for, like, say, family and domestic violence, you need parenting, this, that, and the other. But what's not well understood is that they're all related, and for a lot of them, the most fundamental presenting issue is substance misuse. And until that's addressed, none of the other things can work, basically. So we've got to arrest the most dysfunctional presenting issue before we can then work with all the other issues.
And I have a whole bunch of other questions I want to ask you about that last part in particular, which I'll get to.
It's very complex.
First things first, though, Amelia, what is addiction, and is it always easy to spot?
Well, in short, no. Addiction isn't always easy to spot, and I would liken it to something that we're all very familiar with in the context of family law, which is domestic violence. And you're not going to necessarily see the impact of domestic violence, and nor are you going to see the impact of addiction, obviously, or very clearly, unless you're a family member living with that person that has the issue. So, I mean, addiction is on a continuum. And in short, really, addiction is when a person engages in a behaviour or with substances in a compulsive manner, and despite there being harmful effects, they continue to engage in that behaviour, despite even wanting other people around them wanting them to stop, or if they want to stop themselves, they're just not able to without the appropriate treatment.
I guess everybody, when we think addiction, people probably think to hard drugs like heroin, cocaine, et cetera, the obvious ones, alcohol. But what are some of the other things that people can become addicted to when you're talking about that behavioural aspect? What about from the context of, I guess, a tangible addiction? I guess there's sex, there's gambling. What else is there?
Well, I mean, the professionals now looking at extending the definitions of this in the behavioural area, and there's research coming out now around internet addiction, around gaming. It's basically any behaviour that triggers a release of the feel-good chemicals in the brain that is really a way of numbing pain. Mm-hmm. Numbing and disconnecting from my lived experience in the moment. So usually what triggers an addiction that then develops into something that becomes very dysfunctional, what we find very much is some kind of trauma, be it a childhood trauma, or it can happen in early adulthood. And there are a whole lot of other factors that go to create. One person may become addicted to something and someone else does something else. So I'm not saying it causes it, but what we find is a very important precursor to trigger off an underlying propensity for addiction is trauma. So it's basically any behaviour that releases, that feel good. Like, that's why you see the ads for the lotto. And you get that little feel good every time you scratch. That's what you become addicted to. You become addicted to that chemical in the brain.
Yeah. And I think the key word that I picked up on there was dysfunction. And when it becomes a dysfunction and it starts controlling you and has negative effects on yourself or others, that's the key part of what we're talking about today. And Leisa, I guess that segues into the question, how are you seeing addiction becoming dysfunctional in families, having negative impacts on families, and how that, I guess, plays out in a family law matter as what you've seen?
So I pick up on what Ingrid said before, and Amelia. It's like a revolving door. So unless you can assist your client in dealing with what they need to address by way of their addiction, it's never going to go away. They're going to keep coming back. It's going to be the same issue over and over and over again. So family courts can make a whole myriad of orders about seeking treatment and seeking out assistance in order to, move matters forward. And the usual order, and my friends out there will agree, the usual order usually is go and seek 6 months worth of therapy and come back and let's see what you like and let's see if we can move the matter on. In my view, that's not cutting it anymore, because there is so much out there that everyone's having to deal with, particularly now with COVID. We've got a lot of impacts on families, and that's really telling in some of the cases that are coming through in the family court and the Federal Circuit Court at the moment. I'd like to get into what I think I'd like to see happen, but I don't know, Letitia, if you will let me get there yet.
Don't say it like that. I feel like there's probably a few little plugs we need to fill, and we'll definitely come back to that, because obviously this is about a solutions focus. But because we've got a whole range of professionals on this webinar, it's not just for family lawyers, etc. Let's plug some holes around. If you were talking about the court can order those sorts of band-aid fixes, or what I translated as being a band-aid fix. Can we just go to you and Amelia and Ingrid, just around what are some of the traditional ways addiction would be handled in a long-term way?
This is a good one.
Yeah.
We have a lot to say about.
Yeah. So there is a whole raft of measures that can be taken. Firstly, I do want to point out that most people who could benefit from treatment don't seek it, okay? That's the same for a lot of mental health issues. So we've got a really big issue right there with just people being aware that there is help, being aware that they have an issue, that, there's services there available. Most of the drug and alcohol treatment that is available tends to come through the public health system, and there's a continuum. So you might go for counselling. You might, then you have outpatient, what is called outpatient groups. So you might go to a local hospital or centre where there's usually CBT type programs focused on relapse prevention. If you have a more serious issue, you may need to go to hospital for a detox for a number of days and then go into an inpatient rehab. Some of these are shorter term, some of these can be up to 3 or 4 months. There are private facilities which are extraordinarily expensive, or there is the available for people on lower incomes. that goes all the way up to really chronic and very serious issues where people might even end up in a psychiatric hospital. From the ground, there seems to be a shortage of treatment that's available in any case. And the other key point I wanted to make, so we have people generally don't seek help. And then the second thing is, and this is really important for professionals to understand, addiction can be likened to a chronic illness, say like diabetes, where you need to make life and behavioural changes that's sustainable over a long period of time. And when you compare addiction and say diabetes, and you look at relapse rates, they're around the same. So relapse is part of this chronic ongoing condition. And too often that's treated in a very punitive manner by any number of agencies, and it's seen as a failure. What I want to point out is, let's talk about it medically, a dose of treatment. Okay, so you do, say, our 8-week program, and then you relapse. Doesn't mean the program failed. Doesn't mean you failed. It means that you need ongoing and more support to scaffold you and support that behaviour change. So I just wanted to make that point, that relapse is doesn't have to be, but it often is. It doesn't mean that person's failed. And it may mean they need more wraparound services, they may need some more case management. So treatment is very much out there. So it's really, I think the challenge is linking people to the appropriate care that they need.
Can I just ask you, Leisa, quickly, when we talk about, addiction in family law matters, what are the repercussions of one party or even both parties having an addiction issue? Like, what are we, if you're talking about a case, whether it be someone who's addicted to substances, alcohol, whatever, what repercussions in this?
Yeah, Letitia, I'll break it down. In relation to parenting matters, absolutely, the outcome could be devastating to the extent that a parent may never see their child again because they can't get over their addiction, and their addiction puts their child at risk. So that would be the ultimate worst outcome. We also see, of course, domestic violence, which has just been horrific these last few years. We've seen some terrible incidences of domestic violence, which everyone needs to be mindful of. And in relation to general matters, so where you've got a client coming in and it may be a property matter, but you know that they're suffering from a gambling addiction, or you know that they're suffering from something that will impact on their property matters, then that will certainly result in an outcome which might be quite devastating them financially in their financial outcome. So addictions are absolutely relevant to the way in which we as family lawyers handle our clients' cases. We have to be very alive to what is happening in our clients' backgrounds, and we have to assist our clients and take some responsibility to manage our clients through that. So unless they get a handle on their addictions, then the long-term repercussions are just horrific for them.
So on that, what would be the repercussions of a practicing lawyer or other professional who's dealing with someone who has addiction issues and they ignore it? I mean, if they're giving you directions, I'm guessing there's, a burden or, some form of responsibility on you as the lawyer to actually respond to this in some capacity.
You're exactly right. As a lawyer, we have an obligation to make sure our client has capacity to give us instructions. And if we think their addiction is impeding that, then we as lawyers have to step in. We have to address that. And Amelia and Ingrid put it quite bluntly that some people just don't want to seek out help for their addictions. So we as lawyers then have to protect ourselves against that and walk away, unfortunately, from those circumstances, or else we're putting ourselves in a very difficult position. But in saying that, I mean, if you can work with your client. If the client accepts their addiction, if their client is prepared to do some work on themselves to get through it, knowing that there will be an outcome which might assist them in seeing their children or being able to get an end result in relation to their family law matter, then I think that we're obligated as lawyers, as family lawyers, to assist our client through that process and direct them through that process. And that's why I've been very much supportive of the ladies, because they're offering something that I think can I use the word market, and I don't be disrespectful about it, but we're missing that. There's a gap between people seeking out help and lawyers wanting their clients to get better, and not being able to, they might just not fit into the public system.
And a little bit like teachers, there seems to be debate every other month around what school teachers are responsible for teaching our children. Some lawyers or professionals might say, well, this isn't my responsibility. I didn't study this. Why do I need to be responsible? You brought up a very strong case around why people should be aware of people's addiction issues, and that it could bite you in return if you aren't aware and they're not giving you sober advice, so to speak, direction. But ladies, Ingrid and Amelia, how do we actually spot when we are dealing with an addict, especially if they aren't willing to admit that they are? And we talk about those white-collar addicts who they function, they go to work, they have that outward appearance. Domestic violence in particular has, a lot of marketing messaging has gone out over the past year where it could be a neighbour. And I'm assuming in terms of addiction, it's exactly the same situation. So how do lawyers and other professionals even spot an addict? Are there telltale signs to it?
Absolutely. Firstly, I want to say that can I make a comment on what Leisa was talking about in terms of lawyers taking some responsibility? I just wanted to put forward that's a lot of what our mission is about as consultants as well as treatment providers, is to work directly with lawyers through education, through working almost case management, but working with solicitors and other family law professionals in assisting them and teaching them how to deal so that they don't feel, in over their heads, because we have that expertise. But in terms of spotting, there are red flags. We would suggest that if you'll have a matter where the other party will be bringing up the issue of substances to you, and you need to listen to that. That's very likely. And then something that we do is then do an assessment with that person. Okay, so you do a psychosocial assessment and really dig in and find out what's going on. But as a person progresses, there's what we call unmanageability. Are they late for appointments? Do they miss appointments? Do they seemingly become very reactive and irrational around being questioned around their substance use? And then depending on how, engaged or involved they are, it's something that you get very good at over a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when it comes to what we call the more high functioning group, it is extremely difficult. And typically speaking, addicts hang around with other people that drink and use like them. And it's when we talk about the high functioning group, they spend a lot of time in circles that use substances exactly like them. And so it's very easy for them to justify their behaviours to their spouses about why they're staying out all night, why they're having to go to the pub every night to network, and why they can't just go, 1 month, why is dry July so hard, as an example. There's lots of things, and again, it comes down to the fact that it's at a continuum, and And that's why it's very difficult for people to enter and engage with treatment, because until they're completely broken. And I think preventative is so important to kind of catch them before they get to a point. And we're not saying that everyone will, but let's look at some preventative measures to engage with clients before they're broken, before they don't have a job anymore, because most people that are on that other spectrum, the people that you'd consider the drunks on the park bench, they were also high functioning too at one point. So let's not forget that.
I guess we were talking about the court system and how, the courts can order follicle testing or, urine testing, all of that sort of pathology stuff. And they can behave for that period of time.
Yes.
Which, is the concerning part, especially if they are high functioning and they're a little bit more conscious of what they're doing. Leisa, have you seen cases where this is an issue? Like, do you see this quite regularly where the courts will order this and then all of the pathology tests or whatever come back clean, and then a year later maybe they're back in the legal system again, whether it be civil, criminal, whatever, or family? Is this an area that we need to address?
Oh, look, Letitia, absolutely. This is what I have seen, and this is what has over the years concerned me. It's great while the Federal Circuit called the gatekeeper, because whilst people are in litigation, they want to do the right thing, so they're mostly going along to their drug tests. They're producing, they're doing what they're required to do because that's what they've been ordered to do. So that's all well and good, but in my experience, I have seen where as soon as that court file has closed, that the substance abuse issues just come back again and the problems start surfacing again, and it's like, as you said before, a revolving door. It just keeps happening. So we're not focusing on, we're not grabbing. We've got an absolutely perfect opportunity in the court system to grab on and really try and work with these people to get through a process so that they don't come back into the system, or they don't fall foul of their addiction again, or at least try not to. And I'd like to, I'd like to move into what I'd like to see in the system. We have, and many people out there would know this, we have experts in relation to report writers, we have experts in relation to psychiatrists who offer reports. What I would like to see is that consultants of this nature become experts in the court system, much like your report writer and your psychiatrist who gives reports, and that the client is obligated to carry on maybe a 6-month program where that ongoing consultancy is reportable, so that it's not just turning up for an hour's interview or a day's interview with a report writer or some other expert, that we've got this continuum that the ladies keep talking about, where they are monitoring the client, that they're really firsthand on the evidence, and they know exactly how the client is coping through the program, and they can give that information to the court as a first-hand accountability of knowing exactly how how the client's moving through the process. And I think that if we had that level of intervention, then it may mean that we won't have having to proceed to a trial date or having to proceed to some other court intervention, because it's being monitored. It's being controlled, and we know whether or not someone's going to come through the process and do well or not. And I think that's the most important part about it, that there's more control over it.
So here's the question. The family courts are very busy. They're overburdened already as it is. So on the other side of that, are we asking the courts to do more that they don't have the capacity to do, or is it a solution to actually decrease the burden on the court system?
I think it would decrease the burden. I think that's the whole idea of it, that the court, all the court has to do is provide these persons as experts, let the experts control the show. They're the court's witness, so they can be reportable to the court about how these people are progressing through their program and determine whether or not it's something that's working or if it's not working. And, you know, if it's not working, then there's a regroup. You know, with the judge. If it is working, then let it keep flowing and see if we can move things on to a level where they're going to be removed from the court system. So I don't see it as an additional burden to the court system. I see it maybe as a relief to the system if we can get more people involved with this addiction issue.
What do, Ingrid and Amelia, what do you think about that?
Well, what I'm hearing Leisa say is basically, we've already got a set of experts. We need another set of experts to work collaboratively with each other, because you already do, you know, lawyers and family report writers and other, you know, expert witnesses. But what I hear Leisa saying is, and this is, and I'll let Amelia speak to that, there is a massive gap in the family law system around addiction. And it's not instead of anything. It's not putting more on lawyers. It's saying, here are some, because what we're doing hasn't been done. What we're proposing is brand new, because we've seen a gap, and we're saying, we think we know how to fill it, guys, and this is how. And that's what I'm hearing Leisa say is, yeah, these women, and we have, it's all, we're all ready to go with it. We've got our programs, we've got clients already who we're working with exactly how you're saying, Leisa. But I'll let Amelia talk about the gap as she discovered.
Well, I think, you know, really comes down for me is a frustration around pathology testing. And, you know, I have, as you know, I've been working here at Life Care for over 10 years, and I would say 98% of orders that land on my desk facilitating contact between parties, where there have been allegations around substance misuse. The only thing that is ordered, if there is anything that actually addresses it at all, is around pathology testing. And my frustration, of course, with that is that pathology tests do not change behaviour. We've already acknowledged as a family law as a whole that we need to do things like mandate behaviour change programs for perpetrators of domestic violence. So we've got that awareness, and that's fantastic, and I love that. But what we're not seeing is that addiction is a behavioural disorder. And we've already said here that it's a long-term, complex, entrenched, it's got high rates of relapse, and needs to be dealt with and managed on a long-term basis. And you're not going to do that through getting someone to do a hair follicle test. And I just think it's disgraceful, to say the least, that people are only required to engage in a hair follicle test in order to get unsupervised access to their children. I mean, I see here the worst of the worst. By the time you get to supervised time, this is what I'm told, of course, is that we see the end of the line. We see the worst of the worst here. And a pathology test isn't going to cut it, frankly. And we've seen a lot of really sad cases here over the years. And the other thing, if it doesn't even say pathology test, is that the parent shall not show up to the supervised visit with the child intoxicated. Okay, well, that's pretty easy. But what else are you going to do for that person? Oh, hey, I know, we're going to give them a POT program, a circle of security program. That's not going to address addiction. That's not going to address addiction. There's a reason why people use substances. And unless we get under the hood and get down to the nitty-gritty of what that reason is and work in a therapeutic manner with that client, we are not going to see any change. I'm sorry, but the hair follicle is not going to mean much at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think the same could be said about domestic violence. And I think you've hit the nail there with, is it because the courts are overburdened and professionals are overburdened with everything else they have to do that they've been looking for quick fixes? I think as a society, if we want to get philosophical, we're looking for quick fixes at every turn. But with the amount of media attention domestic violence has received over the past few years, we've started lifting that rug up.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind that addiction isn't in the same conversation, because as you said, there is a correlation, not always, but a lot of the time, I don't know what the statistics are, between some form of addiction and domestic violence. I mean, I'll leave it up to either three of you who want to comment on that, because you would have seen it firsthand.
Yeah, well, the comment I would make is there is a relatively high, it depends on the statistics, but if you look at police statistics going to matters of family and domestic violence, there's the majority, there's some kind of substance involved. It's really important to know substance misuse does not cause domestic and family violence. That's an underlying issue around attitudes to women and, the use of violence. That's quite separate. What addiction does is fuel. It's literally like pouring petrol on a fire. Not only that, when someone is engaging in that kind of behaviour with a substance abuse issue, the men's behaviour change program will not work until the underlying addiction is addressed. And what we're very committed to developing is a trauma and violence informed drug and alcohol program. Okay, violence informed, meaning just like we have trauma informed, because when you're doing drug and alcohol addiction, dealing with the substances is just the surface. Most of the really good transformative treatment goes, like Amelia said, under the hood and looking at those other reasons. And what we're very committed to doing is to not siloing ourselves and saying we've got it all, but to work with those very good that we're aware of out there, men's behaviour change groups, and work with them to address, because that's one of the ways people fall between the gaps, is because we have these silos. And it's not just the men, it's the women. We know that women who experience domestic and family violence will tend to pick up substances more just to cope with. We have them here in the centre where they end up losing their children and we end up supervising them.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had some comments in the comments box, so I'll just read them out. Susan DeCampo, reportable programs can provide a form of judicial oversight and accountability while relieving direct court resources. This is a huge motivator. Absolutely. Anything you wanted to add there, ladies?
Well, and that's part of the program that we've put together. We have our Reframe Your Life program, and as part of that, what we offer is a report that we will write up on the basis of, and we ask our clients, bring in your urine tests and those pathology tests as supporting evidence, and then let's look at the engagement and the motivation to change over a period of time, write that in a report. So it's not just a tick box. It's not just a tick box.
Yeah. So they say you can't help people who don't want to help themselves. And, it's a common storyline in movies, for example, that, addicts can't be forced to get help.
Yep.
So is it any different if a court is ordering someone to attend a program like this? Can you influence change if they don't, A, believe they have a problem, or B, don't actually want to change it?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. There is really, really good evidence out there that in terms of the outcomes, that mandating behaviour change for, substance treatment and voluntary people that go, yep, I need help, there is actually no difference in outcome. What matters is how you motivate. And we've got there's evidence-based approaches now that we personally use, which is based on motivational techniques and approaches that are very effective. So they say you can't lead a horse to water, but boy, you can whisper in their ear. And we have lived experience, and we can win that. I'm not saying with everybody, it's not a guarantee, but we can. We're very confident of that, because we understand what it's like to not want to admit you've got a problem. A lot of the time is the shame. I'm so ashamed of my behaviour. I'm so ashamed. How can I possibly admit I need help? Because if I admit I need help, it means that I'm saying to myself, there's something wrong with me. And we don't say what's wrong with you. We say, what happened to you? Very, very different approach. We're not into diagnosing. We're not into saying, you know, you're this terribly bad person. We're like, something's happened to you. And one of the ways people cope with trauma and adverse experiences is to develop an addiction problem. It's actually a coping mechanism. And right up until this point, it has helped you survive. But it has now become the problem, and you need help with that. That's a very different way to approach it.
Oh, look, I think, you know, there's lots of issues in the society and the community that could be approached with that same compassionate hand. And, you know, I think, as you called it before, lifting under the hood, even with domestic violence, what happened to those people? Perpetrators of sexual violence, all of that sort of stuff. We could be saying, what has happened to this person to, you know, not justify or an excuse it, but if we're looking at wanting to heal and help future generations, it's not going to be done through follicle testing, as you say. Bernadette Farnell has, sorry if I haven't pronounced that correctly, has said, I am seeing more clients where the allegations is illicit drug use in people who are over 50 years old, whereas in the past, my experience was mainly with younger people, i.e. late teens to late 20s. Have you seen any change in the age of people who are presenting with drug issues?
Can I make a comment about that? That's a really good point. The epidemiological data from the US, for instance, talks about these diseases of despair, suicide, depression, substance use that are happening at epidemic rates among people over 50, usually white, middle class men, as a result of real structural change in the economy, a real sense that I don't have purpose, and a real sense, and this speaks to the whole kind of political and economic situation. So yeah, you're absolutely right. For older people, and this is the same kind of data is out there in Australia. So we're having this crisis in the Western world around purpose, around meaning, around aging. And I think addiction is, if you look at it as a social manifestation, it is a social manifestation of deep spiritual yearning and lack of meaning and the need for connection.
And COVID has done nothing to help any of those human needs.
Absolutely exacerbated all of it. Letitia, yes.
Actually, on that, sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, mental health professionals are absolutely overwhelmed at the moment, trying to get into a psychologist, etc. Because
Leisa, are you seeing, is any of this ringing true for you with your recent cases the past 12 months? Obviously not speaking specifically about any of them, but anecdotally, is any of this sounding familiar?
I'm particularly, it's the high functioning professional, just the cocaine abuse, alcohol abuse. I'm gobsmacked. You know, even in 3 or 4 years ago, it probably wasn't as bad as what it is right now. And what scares me the most about that is that it's just becoming quite it's an acceptable practice. It's an acceptable practice in your 50 and 60-year-olds, and it's just the done thing. You know, I remember when I was a very young lawyer, you know, if someone was smoking marijuana, I mean, the court would have been appalled, absolutely appalled, and there would have been all these restrictions put around it. But But my gosh, you know, with the sophisticated drug use we have at the moment, it's just insane, and it's very sad, and it's almost like it's an acceptable conduct in the society, and I think we need to change that. We need to, you know, get people to reset about it.
And I think it is starting to impact the younger generations, which is probably why it's becoming so problematic in the older generations. The research now is kind of showing that there is a bit of a swing in the under 25 category, where it used to be a really high drug, alcohol using population. They're now choosing to abstain more than ever. And that's really interesting. And I think that's because as a society, we're very seen to be health conscious, that the health kicks are the latest thing, and it's all tied into that, and that's what the younger generation is all about, you know, like looking good, feeling good, going on Instagram, all that stuff. But the older generation, they don't have that. It's not as a big of a concern as what it is about that externals, and externals are so important, of course, but yeah.
Well, I mean, anyone interested in looking at the research, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare has some really interesting statistics around that, and I think they do an annual or biannual study with the big data, and that definitely reflects that what the ladies are saying. But, you know, talking about the younger generations, I won't go off on too much of a tangent, but, you know, yes, they're abstaining, but they're becoming addicted to social media and dieting and working out. You know, there's a whole other mental health issue going on with the younger.
Absolutely is. And you know, when we talk about, I mean, what we do, addiction treatment and counselling, it's not just, we don't just deal with the substances, you know, it is all of that as well. It's workaholism. That's probably the biggest one, lawyers, isn't it? You know, it's
and
like
eating disorders.
Eating disorders
as another mental health issue, and it's everywhere. And, you know, and it all ties in together. And I think that addiction is just one symptom, you know, of the underlying
disconnection
issue, and disconnection. And, you know, for us it was this drug, and for you it might be the internet, and for this person, and at the end of the day it's about, is it harmful to other people around you, and how harmful is it for you? Because not everyone who has an addiction to the internet will cause harm to other people, and so just really looking at, in the family context, you know, what impact is this having on the children? Because I think that a lot of that is really missed. People think that because they don't use substances in front of their children, that there should be no problem. And that's a complete misunderstanding.
Well, because if you are not present in the life of your child, okay, what is that child missing developmentally, socially, and let alone the conflict that comes up? And there's some really scary, awful data and work done around the impact of drugs and alcohol within families.
So I've got a question, ladies, in relation to a long-term program. So say you've got a parent who has an addiction in relation to alcohol, and they just cannot keep off it. They go into your program, they're working with you I would imagine they see you weekly, or they see you every second day, I don't know, as much as what they need to get through that. So they get to a point, or they get to a situation where they're coming good, they're recovering, they're working well. Do you cut them loose at that point?
No.
What happens there?
No.
Yeah.
What we, Amelia being, you know, there's social worker, case management. So we integrate case management in with the therapeutic work. We collaborate with our clients. We look at
how much support they need,
what they need, get them connected. You know, there's
connected to other agencies.
There's AA, there's NA, there's Smart Recovery, there's your sporting group, there's your whatever, you need that kind of social connection. And then over time, so you need social supports in your world, so that over time you titrate down and out so that you would have less frequent contact with us, but check-ins, so more intense to begin, and then what's called aftercare at the end, towards the end. In time, we would even like to create support group here where former clients could, we could do this sort of thing and talk recovery. There's so many resources. There's recovery podcasts, there's recovery, you can join a meeting online. There's a lot of that out there, but people need the tools to begin with, and then they need to be empowered to go out and apply it for themselves. So now, absolutely, and that's one of the issues. You're going to rehab for 3 or 4 months, then what?
That's if you make it to the end of rehab.
And that's one of the big issues in our court system, where it just kind of, there's a severance. Okay, thanks very much. There's your final order. Then we're off. But I can see what you're saying. If they can get a kickstart with you, then all they need is that kickstart to feel better. Then it's an ongoing process. And
it is an ongoing process, and they likely will relapse. So what do you need? What do we learn? Do you need some other service? I mean, we have had clients where we've had to say, you actually need to go to detox. We can't help you right now. You need to please go to detox, because for benzodiazepines and alcohol, you can die from withdrawing, so it's a medical issue. So we do that. We're working with a psychiatrist, and we're linking in with GPs. There are very few medical professionals in Queensland who are specialised in addiction. So we're kind of starting at this ground level, working really hard to find those professionals out there who can help us, so we can, refer on. Yeah.
Just conscious of the time, we've got a few minutes left. So if anyone does have any questions, type them in now. But what I think is really interesting in this whole conversation is, Leisa, as legal professionals or professionals in general, you are often referring to other professionals to assist getting a good outcome for your client. And in this instance, it can be a counsellor, or it could be a drugs and alcohol addiction program like D&M is offering. But similar to Amelia and Ingrid, you're also working with a whole team and community of other professionals to support that person. So that whole person approach also comes with a whole range of services. It's not just one person, one solution and one go. It might be a whole range of the courts and all of these other people in a circle working towards helping that person. Leisa, in wrapping up, I'll ask each of you this question. What would you like to see change? If you had a magic wand and you could change something tomorrow, what would you change?
I'll be really quick. I'd want to see in family law matters a less adversarial system. I want to see more health allied professionals coming into our professional system to deal with parents, because I think that's what we need. I think we need, with all due respect, I think we need less lawyers. I think we need more psychologists, psychiatrists, consultants like the ladies here coming in and working with parents.
Well said. Amelia?
Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing that I'd like to see change is mandated behaviour change programs for addiction, because if you don't mandate, they're not going to go to them. So that's it. If you can mandate a pathology test, you can also mandate a behaviour change program
for addiction.
I'm
the same. I mean, that's the gap, basically.
Yeah. No, I think some of the points that have been raised here today are, we could sit here for hours and talk about them, to be honest. And I'm very passionate about that holistic approach in every aspect of our life. But I'll just say to the attendees, if you do, one question from Rachel Miller. Do you think it would be helpful for this kind of treatment to be covered by legal aid type program?
Yes, Rachel.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
If our state government would agree to that, that'd be sensational.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you're talking about, you know, more funding, we know what works is targeted funding. So being targeted like that, you know, you always, yeah, absolutely. But legal aid, I mean, the funding for that's a whole other issue, isn't it?
I mean, also, you know, we're talking about prevention here.
Absolutely.
We're not talking about putting a quick fix over a Band-Aid solution. We're not talking about they'll be back and in the system in some capacity in a year or two. If we're actually dealing at the root cause of a person's, let's put it, heartbreak, there's some form of heartbreak in them that has led them to you know, do any of this sort of stuff. You know, imagine the happier people we're going to have in our lives and running the country in a few years.
Well, and the other thing, Letitia, is this is also crime prevention with children. This is prevention for children as well as prevention, you know, of further harm for adults. So we're talking, you know, a generational, potentially a generational impact. And as we know, socially and politically, the powers that be are usually just interested in the short term. So I think, you know, as professionals, we've really got to lobby on this and push on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you ladies would like to add before we wrap up in a minute?
No, thanks. I think that we've covered some really great ground today, and I hope that the participants enjoy the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. A massive thanks to the three of you. I think it's admirable the fact that you are starting these conversations and really being at the forefront of this conversation and not only educating and empowering other professionals, but I think, you know, lobbying is the next step towards getting this change through. And for those people who have attended today, thank you, because you're now part of this conversation. You're now part of this change, and it is a ripple effect. So thank you so much for participating. You will receive an email with the recording link of this. And for those who didn't attend, they will also, if you'd like to share it with people, we will be putting it also on our social media channels as well as our websites. The contact details for both D&M Consultants and Toomey Family Law will also be in that email if you'd like to reach out to them for anything else. And look, I'm sure another seminar like this will be on the cards. And if you have any other thoughts, questions, or ideas around topics you'd like to be covered, then shoot them through. But I just wanted to thank absolutely every single one of you. Again, Leisa, Ingrid,
thank you, Letitia.
Amelia, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.